Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. We are on the Kitab Imaarah, and the next chapter is about when the Imam orders taqwa of Allah Jalla wa Ala and is just, then he will have a great reward. From Abu Hurairah, the Prophet said, إِنَّمَا الْإِمَامُ جُنَّةٌ يُقَاتَلُ مِنْ وَرَائِهِ وَيُتَّقَى بِهِ فإن أمر بتقوى الله عز وجل وعدله كان له بذلك أجر وإن يأمر بغيره كان عليه منه. The Imam, meaning the ruler, is a shield from whom the people fight behind, and they take protection with him. If the Imam orders the taqwa of Allah and is just, then he will have the reward for that. But if he orders other than that, then he will have its burden. So the Imam is a shield, that is, he provides protection to all those under his authority. So any external force will not be able to reach this person under the protection of the Imam. And we find that if he orders good and is just, then he will have the reward. But if he orders evil, then the sin will be upon him entirely, and it will not be upon those under his authority unless they obey him in that. We also find that jihad is not to be done by groups of people forming their own coalition. Rather, it is to be organized by the Imam. Because the Prophet said, يُقَاتَلُ مِنْ وَرَائِهِ وَيُتَّقَى بِهِ. He is fought from behind and protection is sought from him. But of course nowadays people are so fascinated with guerrilla warfare. And guerrilla warfare has never been known from the Sahaba. Either they were in Mecca, in which case they were not fighting the mushrikeen, even if they were oppressed by them, and thereafterwards they were in Al-Madinah. And jihad was institutionalized by the Prophet, so by the ruler. We did not find these paramilitary type of groups that the Sahaba formed. No, rather it was organized. Let's take this next chapter about pledging allegiance to the Amir, the first one, and then the one after him, and so on. From Abu Hurairah, that the Prophet said, كانت بنو إسرائيل تسوسهم الأنبياء كلما هلك نبي خلفه نبي وإنه لا نبي بعدي وستكون خلفاء فتكثر قالوا فما تأمرنا قال فوا ببيعة الأول فالأول وأعطوهم حقهم فإن الله سائلهم عما استرعاهم. Prophets used to govern Banu Israel. Every time a prophet died, another one would take his place. However, there is no prophet after me, but there will be khulafa, so rulers, and there will be many. They asked, what do you order us to do? The Prophet said, fulfill the pledge of allegiance to the first one, and then the one after him, and so on, and give them their due rights as rulers over you, for Allah Jalla wa Ala is going to ask them about the people He has put in charge of them. We find from this hadith that the message that the Prophets brought is not separate from politics. Rather, it is a message not just of Tawheed and Aqidah and so on and worship, but rather also to govern the people and their affairs in the world. So anyone who says that the Sharia has nothing to do with politics, then this hadith is a refutation of such an opinion. The Sharia of the messengers is their politics. We take from the hadith that this prophet is the last prophet. He says, وَإِنَّهُ لَا نَبِيَّ بَعْدِي. And with these khulafa, we give the pledge of allegiance to the first, and then only after him to the one after. So if person A is the Khalifa, and person A has not passed away yet, and along comes person B who wants pledge of allegiance from the people, we do not grant him the pledge of allegiance, because the Prophet said, فُوا بِبَيْعَةِ الْأَوَّلِ فَالْأَوَّلِ, the first and then the one after him. Similarly, how he says, أَلَا تَصُفُّونَ كَمَا تَصُفُّ الْمَلَائِكَةِ, will you not make your rows just like the angels make their rows? They asked him, how do they do that? The Prophet said, يُتِمُّونَ الصَّفَّ الْأَوَّلَ فَالْأَوَّلِ وَيَتَرَاصُونَ فِي الصُّفُوفِ. They complete the rows first and then the one after it, and they join together in the rows. So you do not enter the second row of the salah until the first has been completed. What if the second person who wants the bay'ah, the person B, is better at governing than person A? We say no, the rule still stands. He is not allowed to take office. Unless it be the case that person A is a kafir and person B is a Muslim, in which case person A needs to be ousted if we have the ability to do so. If we do not, then we have to keep patient and wait for Allah Jalla wa'ala to find for us a way out. Also in the chapter, the Prophet ﷺ said, إنها ستكون أثرة وأمور تنكرونها. قالوا يا رسول الله كيف تأمر من أدرك منا ذلك؟ قال تؤدون الحق الذي عليكم وتسألون الله الذي لكم. The Prophet said there will be athara, that is to say, rulers who will deprive you of your rights, and other matters which you will reject. They asked, O Messenger of Allah, how do you command us to behave if one of us is met with this situation? And the Prophet said, fulfill the ruler's rights for them, so give them what they are due, and ask Allah Jalla wa Ala for your rights. So look at this hadith and the wise advice, because it is tempting in a situation like this to revolt against the ruler. But if you do this, it will lead to a greater fitna and bloodshed. Rather, the idea is to keep patient. So you give the ruler their right, even if they are not giving you your rights. But still, you give them their rights. Because if they are not giving you your rights, then they are oppressing you. But you do not want to lower yourself to their standards. So you give the people the rights they have against you. And as for your rights, which the ruler is not granting you, then the Prophet says you ask Allah Jalla wa Ala for your rights. Asking Allah for your rights can also include making dua for the ruler to guide him, so that he stops his oppression. Also in the chapter from Abdullah ibn al-As, he was sitting in the shade of the Kaaba, and a man called Abdurrahman ibn Abdi Rabbil Kaaba came and sat with him, and there was a gathering. Abdullah ibn Amr ibn al-As said, I accompanied the Prophet on a journey. We halted at a place. Some of us began to set their tents. Others began to compete with each other in shooting. Others began grazing their livestock. When a person announced that people should gather for the prayer, they gathered and the Prophet addressed them. He said, إِنَّهُ لَمْ يَكُنْ نَبِيٌّ قَبْلِي إِلَّا كَانَ حَقًّا عَلَيْهِ أَنْ يَدُلَّ أُمَّتَهُ عَلَى خَيْرِ مَا يَعْلَمُهُ لَهُمْ وَيُنذِرَهُمْ شَرَّ مَا يَعْلَمُهُ لَهُمْ. There was no prophet before me except it was a duty upon him to tell his ummah about the best which he knew for them and to warn them from the worst which he knew for them. وَإِنَّ أُمَّتَكُمْ هَذِهِ جُعِلَ عَافِيَتُهَا فِي أَوَّلِهَا وَسَيُصِيبُ آخِرَهَا بَلَاءٌ وَأُمُورٌ تُنْكِرُونَهَا. And this ummah of yours, safety and security has been made for the first part of it. But as for the latter part of the ummah, it will be afflicted with trials and tribulations and matters which you would reject and find reprehensible. He says, وَتَجِيءُ فِتْنَةٌ فَيُرَقِّقُ بَعْضُهَا بَعْضًا. Trials will come one after the other, each making the previous trial dwindle into insignificance. وَتَجِيءُ الْفِتْنَةُ فَيَقُولُ الْمُؤْمِنُ هَذِهِ مُهْلِكَتِي. Trials will come and a mu'min will say, this will destroy me. ثُمَّ تَنْكَشِفْ. Then it will go away. وَتَجِيءُ الْفِتْنَةُ فَيَقُولُ الْمُؤْمِنُ هَذِهِ. Then another fitna will come and the mu'min would say, no, this one now is going to destroy me. فَمَنْ أَحَبَّ أَنْ يُزَحْزَحَ عَنِ النَّارِ وَيُدْخَلَ الْجَنَّةَ فَلْتَأْتِ مَنِيَّتُهُ وَهُوَ يُؤْمِنُ بِاللَّهِ وَالْيَوْمِ الْآخِرِ وَلْيَأْتِ إِلَى النَّاسِ الَّذِي يُحِبُّ أَنْ يُؤْتَى إِلَيْهِ. So whoever wishes to be removed from the fire and to be entered into Jannah, then his death must come to him whilst he has Iman in Allah and the last day. And he should treat the people as he wishes to be treated by them. The Prophet said, وَمَنْ بَايَعَ إِمَامًا فَأَعْطَاهُ صَفَقَةَ يَدِهِ وَثَمَرَةَ قَلْبِهِ فَلْيُطِعْهُ إِنِ اسْتَطَاعَ. He who pledges allegiance to a Khalifa and gives him the pledge of his hand and the sincerity of his heart, and should obey him to the best of his ability. فَإِنْ جَاءَ آخَرُ يُنَازِعُهُ فَاضْرِبُوا عُنُقَ الْآخَرِ. And if another person comes claiming the Khilafah, then strike his neck. So Abdurrahman said, I came close to Abdullah ibn Amr ibn al-As and asked him, I beseech you, did you hear it from the Messenger of Allah? And Abdullah pointed with his hands to his ears and his heart and said, my ears heard it and my heart retained it. So the narrator says, I said to him, this cousin of yours, Muawiyah, orders us to unjustly consume our wealth among ourselves and to kill one another. And Allah Jalla wa Ala says, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا لَا تَأْكُلُوا أَمْوَالَكُمْ بَيْنَكُمْ بِالْبَاطِلِ إِلَّا أَن تَكُونَ تجارة عن تراض منكم ولا تقتلوا أنفسكم إن الله كان بكم رحيما. This is ayah 29 of Surah An-Nisa, about not consuming your wealth unjustly between yourselves except a trade by mutual consent, and not killing yourselves. Abdullah ibn Amr ibn al-As kept quiet for a while and then said, أطيعه في طاعة الله وعصه في معصية الله. Obey him in the obedience of Allah and disobey him in the disobedience of Allah. We find from this hadith that as-salatu jami'ah, the prayer is being gathered together, is an announcement that can be called out to gather the people together, even if there is no prayer. And in this hadith it appears that there was no prayer. Rather, the Prophet just wanted to gather the people together for this khutbah. Otherwise, as-salatu jami'ah is the adhan called out for the Salatul Kusuf. And the Salatul Kusuf happened on the 29th of Shawwal in the 10th year, the day when his son Ibrahim died. We take from the narration that every prophet has a duty to convey the goodness to his people and to warn them from the evil. This is not the same as telling them what they want to hear. Sometimes the goodness is what you do not want to hear, yet you still have to do your job. And this is the job of a Nabi. So note the word Nabi is used here. So it appears that a Nabi, a prophet, does have to convey the message. But the distinction is that the prophet conveys the message to a people who largely are upon Tawheed. So it's very much similar to a scholar giving a lecture to the students of knowledge. Whereas a messenger is going to give the message to people who will largely disagree with him, so they're upon shirk. We find the lesson from this hadith that the times of safety and security are for the first part of this ummah, not for the latter part. So they were safe from the major fitan, and the major fitan will be for the latter part. The floodgate of the fitna really opened after the assassination of Uthman radiallahu anhu. The Prophet says that the end of this ummah during the final days will see trials and tribulations and matters that you would find reprehensible. And this is exactly what is happening to the ummah. Compare the state of the ummah during the latter times with that of the ummah during the former times, and you'll see the stark contrast. The Prophet is telling us that the fitan, the trials and tribulations, will come one after the other, and the second one will make the first one look trivial. Now the fitna could be directed at your deen, so a fitna which would be something like an ideological attack to attack the deen of Islam and to replace it with kufr. This is the fitna in the deen. It is the worst type of fitna. It is far greater than the fitna against your physical person, let's say, the violent ruler wanting to kill you, because at least with that you will die upon Iman. But with the fitna of the deen, there's a risk that if you succumb to this fitna, you die upon kufr. And the Prophet explains this by saying that the fitna will come and the mu'min will say, this is going to be my downfall. But then it will go away and another fitna will come which will be worse than that. And then the mu'min will say, no, actually this one will lead to my downfall, and so on. And what indicates to us strongly that the fitna spoken of here is the fitna in your deen, that is to say the fitna to try to take you away from your deen and to embrace secularism, is that the Prophet says, whoever wants to be removed from the fire and enter Jannah, then let his death come to him whilst he has Iman in Allah in the last day. So this indicates to us strongly that the fitna spoken of is the fitna of the deen, because this fitna is trying to take you away from your deen. And there is no doubt that in this day and age, we have the kuffar trying to impose their secularism and their hedonistic ideas and viewpoints and values upon the Muslims, and trying to convince Muslims that Islam is outdated. So the message to take away is, do not let the fitna shake or convulse you. You must stand like a mountain. And it is with great sorrow we have seen many Muslims who have fallen by the wayside, engulfed by the fitna. They want to modernize Islam. They want to improve on what Allah Jalla wa Ala has given us. وَلِعِيَاذُ بِاللَّهِ. Also in the Sunan, the Prophet ﷺ said to us, إِنَّ مِن وَرَائِكُمْ أَيَّامَ الصَّبْرِ. Beyond you, meaning coming up, there are days of patience. الصَّبْرُ فِيهِ مِثْلُ قَبْضٍ عَلَى الْجَمَرِ. Patience in those days will be like holding on to hot coals. So you can imagine how excruciatingly difficult this would be. He says, لِلْعَامِلِ فِيهِ مِثْلُ أَجْرِ 50 رَجُلًا يَعْمَلُونَ مِثْلَ عَمَلِهِ. But for the one who works righteousness in those days, there will be the reward of 50 men who work like he does. And the Prophet was asked, 50 men from amongst them? And the Prophet replied, no, أجر 50 منكم, 50 men from you, meaning you the Sahaba. That is to say, for the one who keeps patient in the days of patience, and works righteousness and does not lose his principles and integrity to Allah Jalla wa'ala, then his reward will be like the reward of 50 Sahaba. And this is perfectly understandable, because during the times of the Sahaba, Islam was strong. There was a strong Muslim ruler. Therefore it would be easier to work righteousness, if you look at it from that angle. And it is far more difficult to work righteousness during times of tribulation and times of patience. So therefore it only stands to reason that the reward ought to be greater. The Prophet says that he should firstly die upon Iman, but also such a person must treat others like he would want to be treated by them. That is easy enough to understand. Only the exception will be the Ahlul Harb, the people you are at war with, because you certainly do not treat them the way you would want them to treat you. Their blood and wealth is halal. So this hadith then will be similar to the authentic hadith, لا يؤمن أحدكم حتى يحب لأخيه ما يحب لنفسه. No one has perfect iman until he loves for his brother what he loves for himself. In another version, حتى يحب لجاره, until he loves for his neighbor. The Prophet also speaks about giving the pledge of allegiance with your hand, that's when you shake the hand, and the fruits of your heart, that is, to have a feeling of love and closeness and a sense of being an ally to the Imam, as opposed to having a sense of being an enemy. So you do not want to have this us and them mentality with regards to the Imam. One might say, but nowadays not everybody gives a pledge of allegiance to the Imam. What, all 20, 30, 40 million people of a country should give the pledge of allegiance? The answer is no. As long as the Ahlul Halli wal Aqd give the pledge of allegiance, then that is what matters. You are in following them. Who are the Ahlul Halli wal Aqd, also known as Ahlul Halli wal Rabat? These are basically the influential people. So they would be people like the scholars and the military leaders. Then the Prophet goes on to say, فَإِنْ جَاءَ آخَرُ يُنَازِعُهُ فَاضْرِبُوا عُنُقَ الْآخَرِ. If another man comes contesting the leadership of the country, whilst you already have a ruler, then strike his neck, meaning the second person who disputes or contests the leadership. Now at the end of the narration, the narrator, Abdurrahman, who is narrating from the Sahabi Abdullah ibn Amr ibn al-As, he immediately applies this hadith to Muawiyah, because Muawiyah was at war with Ali radiallahu anh, Ali being the Khalifa, and so Muawiyah was gathering an army, which of course requires expenditure. So Abdurrahman says that, look, this is consuming people's wealth unjustly. As how can you demand money to raise an army to fight Ali ibn Abi Talib, who is the ruler by rights? And also this is killing yourself, because fighting in a war which is unjust is like killing yourself. Well, it is a little too harsh to say that Muawiyah is consuming people's wealth without due right and telling them to kill themselves, because this tussle between Muawiyah and Ali was due to the ijtihad of Muawiyah, and he felt that he was correct. We know that Ali radiallahu anh was in the right. The Prophet said, يَقْتُلُ عَمَّارًا الْفِئَةُ الْبَاغِيَةُ. The transgressive party will kill Ammar. And we know that the people who killed Ammar were from the army of Muawiyah. Therefore, no doubt that the army of Muawiyah was the transgressive party. They were the transgressors. However, Muawiyah made his ijtihad and he was wrong, but we do not say anything negative about the Sahaba. The next chapter about keeping patient with the rulers if they transgress or oppress, and when they do not give you your rights. A man from the Ansari said to the Prophet, will you not employ me like you have employed some other people? And the Prophet said, إنكم ستلقون بعدي أثرة فاصبروا حتى تلقوني على الحوض. After me, you people will be met with athara, which is where the ruler deprives you of your rights and keeps it for his own self. So the Prophet says, keep patient until you meet me at the basin. So this is yet another hadith about keeping patient with the injustice of the ruler, even if he deprives you of your rights. Keep patient. But remember, as we mentioned in the hadith before, give the ruler his rights and ask Allah Jalla wa Ala for your rights. This is the advice of the Prophet. He did not say rebel against the ruler, because this will lead to greater fitna than you already are in. The next chapter about obeying the ruler even if they deprive you of your rights. Salama ibn Yazid al-Ju'fi asked the Prophet, "What do you think if we have rulers who rule over us? They demand that we discharge our obligations towards them, but they do not discharge their obligations towards us. What would you order us to do?" The Prophet avoided answering until the question was repeated either for the second or third time. A man called Ash'ath ibn Qais dragged Salama ibn Yazid, the questioner, away, and the Prophet replied, "Isma'u wa ati'u fa innama alayhim ma hummilu wa alaykum ma hummiltum." This hadith is the same in the meaning as the hadith which has passed by us. سَتَكُونُ بَعْدِ أَثْرَةٌ وَأُمُورٌ تُنْكِرُونَهَا. There will be athara and matters you will reject. And they ask, what do you order one of us to do if he meets this situation? The Prophet says, تُؤَدُّونَ الْحَقَّ الَّذِي عَلَيْكُمْ وَتَسْأَلُونَ اللَّهَ الَّذِي لَكُمْ. You discharge the obligations which are upon you, so you give the rulers their rights. And as for your rights, the rulers are not granting you your right, so you ask Allah Jalla wa Ala for a way out. And this hadith has the same message. He says, "Isma'u wa ati'u, listen and obey. فَإِنَّمَا عَلَيْهِمْ مَا حُمِّلُوا, upon them is what they carry. وَعَلَيْكُمْ مَا حُمِّلْتُمْ, and upon you is what you carry." The next chapter about keeping with the jama'ah when there is fitna and warning against those who call the kufr. This hadith by Hudhayfa ibn al-Yaman. He says, people used to ask the Prophet about the good times, but I used to ask him about the bad times, fearing lest I should meet up with them. I said, O Messenger of Allah, إِنَّا كُنَّا فِي جَاهِلِيَّةٍ وَشَرٍ. We were in the times of foolishness and evil. فَجَاءَنَا اللَّهُ بِهَذَا الْخَيْرِ, and Allah brought us this goodness. فَهَلْ بَعْدَ هَذَا الْخَيْرِ شَرٍ, will there be some evil after this goodness? The Prophet said, نعم, yes. So I asked, هَلْ بَعْدَ ذَلِكَ الشَّرِّ مِنْ خَيْرٍ, and after that evil will there be goodness? The Prophet said, نعم, وَفِيهِ دَخَنٌ, yes, and there will be some smoke in it. That is to say, there will be some hidden corruption in this goodness, so that it will not be pure out-and-out goodness. So I asked, وَمَا دَخَنُ, what is its smoke? That is to say, what is this impurity in this goodness? The Prophet said, قَوْمٌ يَسْتَنُّونَ بِغَيْرِ سُنَّتِي وَيَهْدُونَ بِغَيْرِ هَدِي تَعْرِفُ مِنْهُمْ وَتُنْكِرُ. There will be a people following other than my sunnah and taking other than my guidance. You will recognize them and reject them. I asked, هَلْ بَعْدَ ذَلِكَ الْخَيْرِ مِنْ شَرٍ, and after this goodness will there be evil? And the Prophet said, نعم, yes. دُعَاتٌ عَلَى أَبْوَابِ جَهَنَّمْ, callers on the gates of Jahannam. مَنْ أَجَابَهُمْ إِلَيْهَا قَذَفُوهُ فِيهَا, whoever answers them, they will cast him into Jahannam. So I said, Ya Rasulullah, صِفْهُمْ لَنَا, O Messenger of Allah, describe them to us. He said, نعم, yes. قَوْمٌ مِنْ جِلْدَتِنَا وَيَتَكَلَّمُونَ بِأَلْسِنَتِنَا, they are a people of our skin, and they speak our language. So I asked, Ya Rasulullah, فَمَا تَرَى إِنْ أَدْرَكَنِي ذَلِكَ, what do you advise me if I am met with these times? The Prophet said, تَلْزَمُ جَمَاعَةَ الْمُسْلِمِينَ وَإِمَامَهُمْ, you should keep to the jama'ah, to the group of the Muslims and their imam. I asked, فَإِنْ لَمْ تَكُنْ لَهُمْ جَمَاعَةٌ وَلَا إِمَامٌ, but if they do not have a jama'ah, a congregation, and a ruler ruling over them? The Prophet replied, فَاعْتَزِلْ تِلْكَ الْفِرَقَ كُلَّهَا, keep away from all of these different sects and groups. وَلَوْ أَنْ تَعَضَّ عَلَى أَصْلِ شَجَرَةٍ حَتَّى يُدْرِكَكَ الْمَوْتُ وَأَنْتَ عَلَى ذَلِكَ, even if you have to bite the roots of a tree until death comes to you and you are in this state. So this is the lengthy narration then from Hudhayfa ibn al-Yaman, who is titled Sahib al-Sir, the owner of secrets, because the Prophet gave him and only him the names of the munafiqeen. The Prophet did not publicize these names, and neither did Hudhayfa. He kept it a secret, because many a time character assassinations can lead to more fitna, and by publicly discrediting people it can lead to fitna. He says, I would ask him about the evil times, fearing that I would fall into them, whereas others would ask about the good times. And it is vital to know about the good and the evil so that you can keep away from the evil and stick to the good. You need to know both. You need to know what is tawheed and what is shirk. Both must be known. He says that we were in Jahiliyyah and Shar, and Allah brought us His good, so this is referring to Al-Islam. And so we learn there will be some evil after this goodness, but after the evil there will be a second goodness. But that second goodness will have impurities in it. It will have dakhan, smoke literally. It refers to impurities, or some evil which is hidden away or tucked away in the general goodness. So what's the impurity? قوم يستنون بغير سنتي ويهدون بغير هدي تعرف منهم وتنكر. And this has happened in the past, people stubbornly clinging on to their madhab, or stubbornly clinging on to certain personalities where they should be stubbornly clinging on to the sunnah. For example, if there is a dispute on the 30th of Sha'ban, when it is a cloudy night, has Ramadan begun or not? Some will fast and some will not, according to their madhab. So as for those who do not fast, they may go out to the streets and openly eat, with the intention of openly opposing and boycotting the people of the other madhab who are fasting. And such a thing will lead to enmity and is not permissible. So these people are stubbornly holding on to their own madhab and not following the sunnah of the Prophet, because it is not from the sunnah to create enmity, even with people who differ with you. And so we find this type of ta'assub, or stubbornly holding on to your own methodology or madhab, existing even today. Then after this goodness, will there be any evil? The Prophet says, yes, callers on the gates of Jahannam. Whoever answers them, they will cast him therein. So what are they calling to? Well, they're calling to everything which will cast you into the fire, from a corrupt aqidah, to bad character, to evil actions, and whatever else there may be, which casts you into the fire. And these types of people may be those who have been mixed up with the truth and falsehood. So they see the truth to be false and the falsehood to be true. Maybe they even use evidence from the Sharia to back up what they're saying and claim to be Muslims. The other type could be more of the stubborn type, who simply do not want to follow the truth because it does not accord with their whims and capricious way of life. So either a person is affected with shubuha, specious arguments, or he is affected with shahwa, desires. What about their description? Hudayfa asks. The Prophet says they will have our skin and speak our language. That is to say, they will be from the Arab. If that is the case with the Arab, then you expect it to be yet worse from the non-Arab. So if you are met with times like these, the Prophet said, keep to the jama'ah of the Muslimin and their Imam. And this is an indication that these evil people spoken of are the Khawarij. Because in opposing the Khawarij, you will keep to the jama'ah of the Muslimin and their Imam. And by default then, it means that the da'wah of the Khawarij will cast you into Jahannam, and the Khawarij are people at the gates of Jahannam calling you to it. And if they do not have a jama'ah nor an Imam, then you must keep away from all these factions and sects and different groups following these different manhaj or ways, even if you have to bite on the root of a tree until death catches you whilst you are in this state. We take from the hadith that the Prophet ﷺ would be open to conversation and answering questions. We find from the hadith the Prophet making predictions, which definitely come true. We find the intelligence of Hudayfa that he wants to know the evil as well as the goodness, so that he may protect himself thereby. So to give a simple analogy, you could ask about the pillars of the salah. So this is asking about goodness, but you may also ask about those things which break your salah. So this is like the negative aspects. And no doubt you need to know both. So in this hadith, you do not pledge allegiance to anyone. So what about the hadith which talks about if you do not pledge allegiance to an imam and you die, then you die the death of jahiliyyah? Well, in that hadith, there is an imam but you refuse to pledge allegiance to him. In this hadith, there is no imam in the first place, such that you can ever pledge allegiance. Rebelling against the imam obviously is done militarily, by guerrilla fighters and paramilitary. However, even speaking out against the ruler and criticizing him publicly is from rebelling against the ruler. And the first person to do this was Dhul Qawaisira, who came to the Prophet and he said, "I'dil فَإِنَّكَ لَمْ تَعْدِلْ." Be just because you have not been just. Sure, he did not fight the Prophet, but look at his impudence in rebelling ideologically against the Prophet, accusing him of being unjust. The ulama say he was the first of the Khawarij. Also in the chapter from the same hadith, with slightly different wording, the Prophet says that there will be people following other than my sunnah and taking other than my guidance. There will be amongst them men with the hearts of shayateen in the bodies of humans. And the Prophet told Hudhayfa about what he should do. تسمع وتطيع للأمير وإن ضرب ظهرك وأخذ مالك فاسمع وأطيع. Listen and obey the ruler, even if he beats your back and takes your wealth. Listen and obey. If the ruler oppresses you, be patient and seek reward. But do not rebel against him, because this will lead to a greater fitna. Does the ruler have the right to take your wealth? Well, if you have done wrong, then he has the right to punish you financially. As for example, the Prophet ordered in Sunan Abi Dawud that the one who steals from the war booty, ghulul, then burn his wealth and beat him. So you can give financial punishments. Also in the chapter from Ibn Abbas, the Prophet said, من رأى من أميره شيئا يكره فليصبر فإنه من فارق الجماعة شبرا فمات فميتة جاهلية. Whoever sees from his ruler something which he hates, then let him keep patient. For whoever leaves even a handspan away from the jama'ah and he dies, then his death will be a jahiliyyah death. That is, his death resembles the death of a kafir. Also, Nafi' reports that Abdullah ibn Umar visited Abdullah ibn Mutir in the days when the atrocities were perpetrated on the people of Al-Madinah at Harra during the rulership of Yazid ibn Muawiyah. Muawiyah ibn Mutir said, place a pillow for Abdullah ibn Umar. But Ibn Umar said, I have not come to sit with you. I have come to tell you a hadith which I heard from the Prophet. He says, the Prophet said, من خلع يدا عن ضاعة لقي الله يوم القيامة لا حجة له ومن مات وليس في عنقه بيعة مات ميتة جاهلية. Whoever withdraws his hand from the obedience of the ruler, he will meet Allah on Yawm al-Qiyamah and no argument will he have to support him. And whoever dies and he has not pledged allegiance to the ruler, then he will die the death of Jahiliyyah. So both of these hadith have a common thread: be patient with the evils of your ruler. At the Battle of Harra, Yazid ibn Muawiyah sent 12,000 soldiers to attack the people of Medina because they threw out his governor, which he appointed over Medina. Even if your ruler is oppressing you, the hadith tell us to keep patient and do not leave the fold of obedience. Do not rebel against the ruler, as long as he is still a Muslim. Otherwise he could be as sinful as you like. Be patient, for if you leave even a handspan out of obedience, you will die the death of Jahiliyyah. It does not mean you will die as a kafir, but you will die a death resembling the death of the Jahiliyyah, because only a kafir does not pledge allegiance to the Muslim ruler, and so you resemble such a kafir. Nowadays we do not have one ruler of the Muslims. Rather, the Muslim nation is divided into different countries, each with their separate ruler. So what is upon the people to do is to pledge allegiance to that particular ruler and not to revolt. And if you hate the ruler, then make dua for Allah Jalla wa Ala to rectify his affairs. What about those Muslims who are in kuffar countries? Well, we say that it is upon them to obey the law of the land, as long as it does not tell them to explicitly disobey Allah Jalla wa Ala. The next chapter about those who try to disrupt the unity. From Arjafa, he says, I heard the Prophet say, من أتاكم وأمركم جميع على رجل واحد يريد أن يشق عصاكم أو يفرق جماعتكم فاقتلوا. Whoever comes to you and your matter, meaning political matter, is all united together under one man, and this person who comes wants to break your stick or split away your unity, then kill him. So this hadith is talking mainly about the Khawarij, because they are the ones who want to replace the ruler and break your unity. Breaking your stick here means somebody who wants to undermine your solidarity and split away your unity. And this is what the Khawarij would want to do. They're the rebellious type of people, and the order is given to kill them. And this is similar to what we have come across before in the longer narration. من بايع إماما فأعطاه صفقة يده وثمرة قلبه فليطيعه إن استطاع فإن جاء آخر ينازعه فاضربوا عنق الآخر. So if another man comes disputing the leadership, then strike his neck. So no one is allowed to dispute the leadership after the leadership or the imamah has been established. And so this hadith really is similar in meaning. The next chapter, when two khalifas are given the pledge of allegiance. From Abu Sa'id al-Khudri, the Prophet said, إِذَا بُويِعَ لِخَلِيفَتَيْنِ فَاقْتُلُوا الْآخَرَ مِنْهُمَا. If two Khalifas are given the pledge of allegiance, then kill the latter of the two. So here the situation is, one Khalifa is given the pledge of allegiance, and along comes another man seeking the pledge of allegiance. And even if he succeeds in gaining the pledge of allegiance from some people, kill him, because that second person is a Khariji, he's from the Khawarij. Because demanding a pledge of allegiance when you already have an Imam is considered khuruj, or rebellion against the Imam. And that is what the Khawarij do. So again, this hadith is similar to the one in the last chapter. The next chapter about hating what the Amir does if he violates the Sharia, but leave off fighting him as long as he prays. Salama narrates that the Prophet said, ستكون أمراء فتعرفون وتنكرون فمن عرف برئ ومن أنكر سلم ولكن من رضي وتابع قالوا أفلا نقاتلهم قال لا ما صلوا. The Prophet said, there will be rulers, you will recognize and like their good deeds, but dislike their bad deeds. The one who recognizes and hates their bad deeds is absolved from any blame, and the one who rejects their evil deeds by his hand or by his tongue is saved. However, the one who is pleased and follows the ruler in their evil, he is the blameworthy type. They asked the Prophet, should we not fight such rulers? The Prophet said, no, as long as they establish the prayer. So in this hadith, the ruler is doing something evil and violating the Sharia. Either you try to stop them by hand or at least speaking out against it, and you are free of their evil. Or perhaps you are unable to do this, but at least you hate it in your heart, again you are safe. But if you are pleased with the evil, or you actually indulge in this evil and follow them, then you are ruined. So note that just being pleased with the evil is as if you are doing the evil. So being pleased with it in your heart is dangerous enough. So how about actually physically practicing this evil and committing it? But the Prophet says you must not fight them as long as they pray, because as long as they pray, they are still Muslim. If we combine this hadith with the previous one which we have come across about rebelling against the ruler, where the Prophet said, إِلَّا أَن تَرَوْا كُفْرًا بَوَاحًا عِنْدَكُمْ فِيهِ مِنَ اللَّهِ بُرْهَانٍ, except if you see open kufr, then you can rebel against them. And in this hadith is saying, you do not rebel against them as long as they pray. So if we combine both of these hadith, we find that not praying is open kufr. And we are talking about the one who completely leaves off the salah. So prays 0 prayers in one day, continuously, every day. We may take from what has preceded that there is a difference between openly rejecting the ruler in what he opposes of the Sharia and actually taking up arms against him. You are not allowed to take up arms against any Muslim ruler. But if he does something which opposes the Sharia, then we have to condemn that particular action. Now, this is not the same as character assassination. We do not do that, but rather we condemn the evil action as opposed to the ruler himself, because this could incite a military rebellion, which is not permissible. The next chapter about the best of your rulers and the worst. From Auf ibn Malik, the Prophet said, خِيَارُ أَئِمَّتِكُمْ الَّذِينَ تُحِبُّونَهُمْ وَيُحِبُّونَكُمْ وَيُصَلُّونَ عَلَيْكُمْ وَتُصَلُّونَ عَلَيْهِمْ وَشِرَارُ أَئِمَّتِكُمْ الَّذِينَ تُبْغِضُونَهُمْ وَيُبْغِضُونَكُمْ وَتَلْعَنُونَهُمْ وَيَلْعَنُونَكُمْ قِيلَ يَا رَسُولَ اللَّهِ أَفَلَا نُنَابِذُهُمْ بِالسَّيْفِ قَالَ لَا مَا أَقَامُوا فِيكُمُ الصَّلَاةَ وَإِذَا رَأَيْتُمْ مِنْ وُلَاتِكُمْ شَيْئًا تَكْرَهُونَهُ فَاكْرَهُوا عَمَلَهُ وَلَا تَنْزِعُوا يَدًا مِنْ طَاعَةٍ. The best of your rulers are the ones whom you love and they love you, and they pray for you and you pray for them. That is, make dua. And the worst of your rulers are the ones you hate and they hate you. You curse them and they curse you. They asked, O Messenger of Allah, should we not fight them with our swords? He said, no, as long as they establish the prayer amongst you. If you people see from your rulers something which you hate, then hate the actual action itself and do not withdraw even a hand from their obedience. This hadith again consolidates the previous ahadith. The word salah here, yusalluna alaykum, they pray for you, it is dua, because salah means dua in the language. So as for the evil ruler, do we fight him with the sword even if we may hate him and what he does? The answer is no. If he does evil, then we certainly hate the evil action, just as the Prophet said, Man arafa bari'a. Whoever recognizes and rejects this, evil action, then he's free. وَمَنْ أَنْكَرَ سَلِمْ. But whoever actually speaks out and does something against it, he is safe. وَلَكِنْ مَنْ رَضِيَ وَتَابَعَ. But rather the blame is upon the one who is pleased with this action in his heart, or the one who actually follows the ruler in this. So you can speak out against an evil practice, as we find authentically in the Sunan of Abi Dawud and others. أفضل الجهاد كلمة حق عند سلطان جائر. The best of jihad is to speak a word of truth to an oppressive ruler. So certainly you're allowed to correct the ruler privately, but it's completely different from actually rebelling against him. That is what the Khawarij would do. So for example, if the ruler is drinking wine, that is a major sin. So you're allowed to tell the ruler that drinking wine is a major sin, and there are severe warnings for this. And then you can mention the ahadith and evidences and so on. But what you do not do is to say, oh, you are a drunkard, you're an evil, you're fasiq, you're this and that. So ad hominem attacks. But definitely character assassination should not be carried out, because this causes fitna and corruption and rebellion. And Imam Ahmad, in the fitna of the ideology that the Quran has created, he simply made plain the truth and did not character assassinate the ruler who wanted to impose on the people that the Quran has been created. Let it be noted that it is not permissible to give a public address on a minbar, let's say, delivering a khutbah and such like, to speak evil of the ruler, because this is going to incite hatred and violent revolutions. And this would be from the practices of the Khawarij. There may be some groups of Muslims who have their own masjid, and they're the rebellious types, the Khawarij types. Should you pray in such a masjid? Well, your prayer would be sahih, there's no doubt. However, if you pray in that masjid, you're simply going to encourage them. So it's best to keep away from them and let them feel isolated, so as to discourage them. What about the hadith talking about cursing the rulers? Well, this does not mean that the hadith is permitting us to curse the rulers. Rather, it's telling us what happens, not what ought to happen. For example, the Prophet told us that we will follow the Yahud and the Nasara, such that even if one of them enters a lizard's den, there will be from us those who enter it. This is what is going to happen, or what happens, not what ought to happen. Or for example, in the Sahihain, during the times of fitna, a man will pass by a grave and he would say, Ya laytani kuntu makanak, oh, would that I was in your place, meaning would that I was dead. But we know you're not allowed to wish for death. Or for example, the Prophet telling Adi ibn Hatim, فَإِنْ طَالَتْ بِكَ الْحَيَاةُ لَتَرَيَنَّ الضَّعِينَةَ تَرْتَحِلُ مِنَ الْحَيْرَةِ حَتَّى تَطُوفَ بِالْبَيْتِ لَا تَخَافُ أَحَدًا إِلَّا اللَّهِ. If you live a long time, you will surely see a woman traveling, setting off from a place called Al-Hayra until she reaches the Kaaba and making tawaf, not fearing anyone except Allah. And Adi says that indeed he did see this. Now this is not an evidence that a woman can travel without a mahram. Rather, the Prophet is saying this is what will happen, not what ought to happen. We also learn from the hadith that as long as they establish their salah amongst us, then we do not fight them, however evil they may be, because they are still Muslim. And do not even break away one handspan from their obedience, because as the previous hadith told us, that if we die in this state, then we would die the death of Jahiliyyah. And in this world there are only two worldviews and ways of lives, Islam and Jahiliyyah. There is no third. The next chapter, about the pledge of allegiance to fight and not flee, and the Bay'atul Ridwan. From Jabir ibn Abdullah, he says, we were on the day of Al-Hudaybiyah 1,400, and we gave the Prophet the pledge of allegiance under the tree, and Umar was holding the Prophet's hand. The tree's name is Samura. We pledged that we will not flee, but we did not pledge him on death. Jabir is talking about the Bay'atul Ridwan, the pledge of pleasure, because Allah is pleased with those people who took the pledge. The Prophet wanted to make Umrah. The people of Makkah prevented him, so he sent Uthman radiallahu anh to negotiate with the Quraysh. He did not return, because the Quraysh, respecting Uthman radiallahu anh, wanted to entertain him and keep company with him. So he did not return for a while, and the rumor spread that perhaps they'd killed him. And if that's the case, then there had to be a war, because if you kill the messenger, that is a declaration of war. In another narration, he says everyone took the pledge except a man called Jad ibn Qais al-Ansari. So it seems that this man is a munafiq. In fact, he is also the one who asked permission not to go to the Battle of Tabuk. Allah Jalla wa Ala specifically mentions what he said, وَمِنْهُمْ من يقول ذلي ولا تفتني ألا في الفتنة سقطوا وإن جهنم لمحيطة بالكافرين. He said, give me permission not to leave and do not put me in trials, because he says that he will be put into fitna because of the women in Tabuk. Allah Jalla wa Ala says, but he has fallen himself into fitna because not going and fighting the way of Allah is the biggest fitna. Jabir says that he hid under the belly of his camel, not giving the pledge. This is a clear action of the munafiq, and Allah knows best. Also, Jabir narrates in another narration, the Prophet said to these people giving the pledge of allegiance, Antumul yawma khayru ahli al-ard. Today you are the best of the people on earth. Jabir says to his students, whom he is narrating this hadith, if I had my eyesight, I would show you its place. The tree does not exist anymore because Umar radiallahu anh cut it down. And this was a wise decision because this tree became famous and people started to visit it. And it will not be long where superstitions will creep in and people will start to venerate it, try to derive blessings from this tree, and all other sorts of nonsense and shirky acts would start to develop. We mentioned that the Prophet said to these people who gave them the pledge under the tree called Samura, Antum al-yawma khayru ahli al-ard. You are the best of people on earth today. We mentioned that tree was cut down by Umar because people began to visit this tree, and it would only be a matter of time that they would start to take blessings from this tree and start committing shirk. In some narrations it says that they were 1400, in other narrations it says they were 1500. This is not a big deal because perhaps they were a little more than 1400, but you could round it to 1400, or maybe you round it up to 1500. It's not a great big deal. You remember in the first narration, Jabir says that we took the pledge of allegiance, that we would not flee, but we did not take it on death. However, in the chapter, in another narration, from Salama ibn al-Aqwa, he was asked, what did you take the pledge of allegiance for on the day of Hudaybiyah? So he's talking about the Bay'atul Ridwan, and he says, Ala al-Maut, upon death. So how do we reconcile this apparent contradiction? Well, we say they took the pledge that they would not flee, even if they had to die. Because in the first narration, Jabir just says that we took the pledge that we would not flee. However, what is necessary from this is that if you will not flee, then it is possible that death may overtake you because the enemies may kill you. So they must have verbally taken the oath not to flee, but perhaps death was not mentioned verbally in the oath. However, what follows from the pledge of not fleeing is that you may well have to die. And this is what Salama ibn al-Aqwa is saying. And so like this, we could reconcile the two narrations. Okay, let's take some review questions at this point. So question number 1. Is the Sharia deprived of politics? Give the evidence for your answer. Question number 2. What is the prophetic guidance for when you're living under a ruler who takes his rights from you but does not give you your rights? Question number 3. What is the prophetic guidance for when the ruler does something to clearly and openly oppose the Sharia? And this is not some sort of ijtihadi matter, it is an open opposition to the Sharia.